Welcome back, everyone. I am Cass Piancey, and I'm here, as usual, with my partner in crime, Bennett Tomlin. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. How are you, Cass?
I'm hanging in there. We had a pretty big week last week, so I'm trying to get us to record something that is more relevant than some of our other topics of choice, which get deeper into the weeds. So today we're going to be talking about decentralized autonomous organizations, or as they are known on the Twitter sphere and online as DAOs. Let's start with the first DAO, the original Ethereum Decentralized Autonomous Organization from years ago. So if you can explain the purpose of that and the disaster that followed.
The goal of the original Ethereum DAO was to basically replace the somewhat centralized functions of the Ethereum Foundation with this new organization that would take place on the blockchain. Governance decisions for Ethereum as a whole would be done on the Ethereum chain, making the Ethereum Foundation no longer needed. Or at least its role could be minimized to help aid in decentralization of Ethereum. Unfortunately, there were some bugs in the smart contract code that governed the DAO that resulted in a huge number of Ethereum being trapped in this contract and at risk. Through a combination of efforts of a bunch of white hat hackers and an irregular state transition that was entered into the Ethereum chain, they were able to recover the funds and end that disastrous experiment.
So code is law, but the law is broken, is the classic example of what happened for that first DAO, right?
Yeah, in many respects. And really what that comes down to, like, code is law is lots of time covering up the fact that often at the lowest level, there's a lot of social coordination that goes into these decisions or running these systems and these organizations, as would be expected because that's how people work. And so often the higher levels of consensus, of agreement, of the code, the logic, whatever, are law until they violate what the social consensus expects.
We've recently seen a reemergence of DAOs as a pivotal part of the forthcoming emergence of Web3 and the complete alteration of the world as we know it. So we've seen this there was this period where they did the DAO classically. It failed. And then I think people were kind of put off from the idea of DAOs after that initial massive failure and almost the end of Ethereum, basically. I mean, that was almost the end of Ethereum, right? And you also have Ethereum Classic, which now operates based on what happened with all of that, right?
Yes, Ethereum Classic was the fork that came off of Ethereum from the group of miners, developers, and users who refused to accept the irregular state transition that was required for recovering all the funds that had been locked in the DAO.
A lot of people forget that. I think a lot of people kind of ignore that Ethereum had this moment of completely, essentially proof of centralization, and then having to attempt to decentralize itself after that proof was given.
Yeah, at the very least, proof of coordination, right? We can argue about how decentralized it was, but at the very least, it showed that these disparate groups of people could come together and come to agreement on introducing these kind of changes to the chain.
And that's fine. So there was this problem. It almost killed Ethereum. It didn't kill Ethereum. Ethereum is obviously the number 2 cryptocurrency today. There's always bugs with cryptocurrencies. We've spoken to a lot of people about the famous bug with Bitcoin where someone could claim, what was it, like all the Bitcoins as a reward for minting a block or like whatever it was. I don't know.
Yeah, it was a little bit different than that. There was an unsigned integer that you could overflow, and in doing so there was billions and billions of Bitcoin, so they had to basically roll back the chain. And besides that, there was another bug in the original implementation that would have resulted in there being more than 21 million Bitcoins. So most major blockchains at least have had pretty serious implementation errors at different times.
Yeah, these immutable blockchains often have flaws that need to be
Muted.
muted. But anyway, my critique is not that blockchains have problems. Inherently, any new tech is going to have problems, and especially in the code. But I think we're here to talk about DAOs because they've reemerged as this, change the world mechanism. And I'd like to hear about why. I think why they got so much attention again was that Constitution DAO moment that happened last year. So maybe we should talk about that.
Sure. So the Constitution DAO was a group of a bunch of people on the internet decided to come together and donate a whole bunch of their Ethereum to a few dudes in the US who set up a corporation. The dudes behind this corporation, and I don't actually know that they're all men, so I should stop saying dudes. The people behind this organization decided that they wanted to purchase one of the last remaining copies of the Constitution. And so you could donate your Ethereum to them, and if you trusted them, they would go purchase the Constitution. And in exchange, they'd give you some tokens that had no governance, no ability to do anything, but you'd get the tokens nonetheless.
And they were a corporation, like a Delaware corporation?
Yeah, they were set up in Delaware.
So they were a centralized Delaware corporation that was calling themselves a DAO.
And this is one of the most frustrating things about DAO, right? Like you already defined it. It means Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And when you're talking about 8 dudes on a multi-sig in Delaware, like which part is autonomous? What part is decentralized? I mean, you've definitely got an organization, but I feel like you've got 2 extra letters there that you haven't really justified yet.
Yeah, this is a big issue that I see in blockchain regularly, whether it's NFT stuff, cryptocurrency stuff, or things like DAOs, where you see these impressive, bold claims from proponents. And if anyone is interested, there is a really well done, it's incredibly long, I think it's 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that, but there is a really interesting and well done YouTube video by Dan Olson at Foldable Human on Twitter. And he dives into NFTs, DAOs, all of this stuff. And he particularly hones in on the fact that basically what you just said, that DAOs often have a token to sell you. They usually aren't very decentralized. And there almost never is some sort of algorithm or robot involved that is making these decisions for the people or helping to delineate what decisions need to be made by token holders. Like, that isn't a thing that is actively happening in almost any of these DAOs.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. And I think probing a little bit deeper into the Constitution DAO example really gets into a few of these, right? So you have tons of people donate their Ethereum to this corporation. They get their people token in response. The people behind the Constitution DAO decide they're going to go to Sotheby's and put in a bid on this Constitution that's up for sale. And here's where we really expose one of the largest issues with these DAOs as a fundraising mechanism. And that's what many of these neo-DAOs have been, is just basically a fundraising mechanism, is that you are broadcasting to the entire world exactly how much money you have available. And so when the Constitution DAO friends showed up at Sotheby's, Ken Griffin of Citadel notoriety also showed up and bid like a few pennies more than the Constitution DAO people could and won the Constitution. And if I'm being completely frank, I'm not convinced that Ken Griffin wanted a constitution before he heard that a bunch of people in crypto did. But regardless, once he heard they did and saw exactly how much they were willing to bid, he decided he was willing to bid that much plus a couple bucks.
And look, I don't think either one of us are big Ken fans, so it's not a suggestion that we're happy a guy who's working at Citadel won this thing. I think it's funny. It's
hilarious.
Really funny. And not only is it funny, but I watched, the auction was on YouTube. There was a live stream of all this stuff going on. There were other NFTs and stuff that were up for sale, and
we were recording during it.
And it was possibly the first or second or third or something. It was like they were doing a large portion of the auction in cryptocurrency, which was also really funny to see because the frustration was palpable for bidders. They were like, why do I have to say 20 Ethereum. Like, can I please just bid in US dollars right now? And you're like, no, I guess you can't. I guess you can't have fun having to use these ridiculous volatile metrics to place your bids right now. And it was really funny to watch. Also, yeah, it was exciting to see that the Constitution, which they even stated the estimated value beforehand, which I believe was 5 million, shot up to over 40 something million, like 45 million or something like that, just because this DAO had the money and was definitely going to take the bid to their number that they could hit, and Ken was ready to outbid them, like you said. So the whole thing was funny to watch. The whole thing was silly. And again, ultimately we have, while they like to claim in essence a win because they got a lot of money very quickly into their DAO, they lost the auction. They did not get the Constitution, and there was this weird gray time period. Can we describe what happened after they lost?
Sure. And I do think it's hilarious that they tried to pitch it as a win. If your entire organization exists for a single purpose and you failed to achieve that purpose, you don't get to say, we almost won. You failed. So after it ended, there was a discussion among the DAO as to what to do. Some wanted to basically take all these funds they'd raised and come up with a way to reorganize towards another goal. Perhaps even give the people tokens that they handed out so freely some kind of actual power over the DAO, because currently they had no power over the DAO. They also opened up the ability for people to start getting refunds, to exchange their people token back and get the Ethereum they put into the DAO back for them. However, Ethereum gas fees being what they are, it has not been possible for all of the small donors to be able to reasonably collect their refunds. And more interestingly, perhaps to me, there's still over 5 billion people tokens, which again never had any governance ability or claim against the DAO in the first place, still circulating and in use. More recently, a new group has come together towards the end of November, beginning of December, to create what they're calling the People DAO, a meta DAO, a DAO that will govern other DAOs that will be governed by the People token from the Constitution DAO. And so now, if you are still a holder of People, which is a token that is trading at 10 times, at least, more than 10 times the value in Ether it represents, you can use it to vote on the decisions of the People meta DAO. And that's the current state.
This sure feels confusing for anyone. I'll put a period at the end of that, for anyone.
Sure is confusing.
It also seems like essentially very unwelcoming for anybody that isn't hyper fluent in all of this stuff. Now, let's also point out that to acquire People tokens, how do you acquire these things?
So originally you got them by giving your Ether to the Constitution DAO, and then you got the pointless, meaningless People token in response. Now, there's no way to get new People. You can exchange your People back for Ethereum through the Constitution DAO juice box, or you can buy People on the couple of exchanges that listed it. So like Binance, OKX, and really that's about it. And then you can have the token to go vote in your MetaDAO. I don't really know what a MetaDAO is or how it's going to work, but
so this is another point brought up in that video by Dan Olson. What we're seeing, at least we're now you're talking about this MetaDAO, whatever. I'm going to ignore that for the moment. But what we are seeing is that these DAOs' primary function right now, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who are going to be screaming about how DAOs can be used for anything, but right now they primarily appear to be used as a fundraising tool to buy stuff.
I think the ones that are really like taking a lot of the oxygen out of the room, the ones that are really dominating the conversation, are often these fundraising ones. There was one that was pitched as wanting to buy an NBA team. There's been a bunch of those passed around. But I mean, I think it's important to remember that a lot of like the foundational DeFi protocols are often actually governed by a DAO, right? Like MakerDAO being one of the most classic examples, where a lot of the governance decisions and stuff for the Maker team are decided on by the DAO. And I think that perhaps is the place where DAOs make way more sense to me than like as a fundraising mechanism. And I think that's because like they don't really add much to the fundraising thing, like to like the Constitution DAO. What they did with Constitution DAO could have been executed using classical traditional finance things, and not much would have been lost. But for something like MakerDAO, having a way for the participants in the protocol to express their beliefs about what the protocol should do makes a sort of sense to me.
So you're suggesting there is a time and place for DAOs. It's just that right now, almost exclusively, they're being used in a really weird and essentially, you can't say improper, but meaningless reason. Like the reasons they're being used provide no extra value.
Almost always. And I think even in the cases where DAOs as they exist now are bringing value, they are very rarely decentralized autonomous organizations. There's almost always a whole bunch of discretion at some level in the process about which proposals get voted on, about how those proposals get implemented, about what these things look like, that is still very much non-autonomous. And so I think they are mismarketed even where they're useful.
And that's the next bit that I wanted to get into, because there's a lot of, let's call it what it is, there's a lot of venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, and just vultures out there who are slanging these ideas. They're talking about NFTs, they're talking about DAOs, they're talking about Web3, from Andreessen Horowitz folks to Lee Jin, who is this woman on Twitter who has made her venture capital goals quite clear in regard to Web3. I'd like to use one of her tweets, honestly, as an example of the absurdity and hyperbole that I see in these discussions. What she said back in November is that DAOs represent the next step forward in the labor movement. And I remember this tweet taking off, and I remember thinking, you've got to be kidding me. This is the answer for unions that have been getting destroyed for decades and decades and decades, while American business has moved in a very different direction, and all of this stuff has happened to purposely kind of destroy these unions. The answer all along was decentralized autonomous organizations, and this is going to change labor as we know it. It's going to put the power back in the people's hands and level the playing field. Pause and think about why a venture capitalist from Andreessen Horowitz previously would be interested in empowering the people.
I think the more likely explanation, coming from just about any Silicon Valley venture capitalist, is that the goal is actually to disempower the individual worker while empowering the organization itself, the business, right? This has been the classic move for gig work for the last decade, right? Uber, DoorDash, whatever. The idea is to take away the protections for the worker, to commodify and make fungible the efforts of the laborer, and make it so that any individual contribution can be easily replaced by another individual while the organization itself persists. And anyway, I think of using DAOs for the labor movement, it almost always ends up in my head with an eternal organization that stands and infinitely replaceable laborers coming in and out with no real protection or benefit for them in general. I am struggling to even conceive of a way in which DAOs meaningfully empower laborers in our environment.
I fully agree. I think this is what I want people to be careful of, because I'm old enough, you aren't, but I'm old enough to remember the .com bubble. And The claims being made in the middle of the dot-com bubble were so incredible, and everyone believed it. Everyone believed it. Everyone believed that, like, the internet's going to be able to replace everything, and it's going to change the world in all the ways. And the internet meaningfully changed the world. It did. I'm not here to deny that. And a lot of the changes that it brought about, I think communication is the main thing that the internet fixed. It was always more difficult to interact and communicate with people before the internet allowed instant text, video, audio, all of this stuff to transcend country or borders or all of this stuff. What it hasn't solved is people and how people behave and human psychology. So this idea, I think people love to take on some new thing that is happening. And I think it's important that you mentioned that, like, oh, MakerDAO makes more sense to me than almost all of the ideas people are coming up with right now, because there can be real utility in these things for certain stuff. The problem is that everyone is jumping into a thing right now because they hear these words, these buzzwords, Web3, NFTs, DAOs, decentralized. You hit these notes, and then VC money wants to join in. It's just a cheat code. You get to enter in these words into your pitch, and you get extra money because of it. And again, the ones who are going to end up losing money on these kind of insane ideas oftentimes aren't going to be the VCs who are dumping in money early. It's going to be you when you hear about it a month and a half after that VC bought in, and you start buying it, and then it shoots up, VC dumps it, and VC's out. We've seen it over and over again. I think Chamath talked about it on his podcast with Jason Calacanis and...
David Sachs.
Anyway, Chamath was specifically, I think, discussing Solana and how he was like, yeah, got to dump those bags. And it's just like there's no self-reflection. It's pure profit maximalism. The only thing they care about is walking away with more money than they had before. And when I say money, I don't mean Solana or Ethereum or Bitcoin, and neither do they.
Neither do they. I love that video because it is one of the few public cases we have of a VC openly admitting that they sell and trade the claim against non-vested tokens, right? Because you'll often hear people when they're discussing tokenomics or things like that, like, these tokens aren't in circulation. These won't actually go to the VC for 1 year, 2 year, 4 years, whatever. And so we shouldn't really count these. And meanwhile, the VCs are taking advantage of the fact that they got a massive pre-sale discount to sell the claim against the tokens rather than the tokens themselves, so that they can still get liquidity. And meanwhile, the retail investor believes that the VC has yet to even have access to those tokens. And the VC has already sold their position. And again, y'all were taken advantage of.
Yeah. Don't ever think these VCs are trying to get you in on the ground floor of the next big project, because I promise it's not true. I absolutely 110% promise they do not care about you. They want more money. And if you lose everything to your name, they could not care less.
They never want you on the ground floor. At the absolute best case, they want you one floor past whoever they got in.
Yeah. And so, again, my point with this long rant about VCs and all these people slanging DAOs and NFTs and stuff is that they're not slanging it to be your friend. They might say these things like, it's going to be the next movement for labor unions. It's going to be the next big thing that alleviates poverty. Oh, okay. Okay, venture capitalist with $1 billion in your bank account. I bet that's what the solution is. It couldn't be that you don't need $1 billion in your bank account. That couldn't possibly be the answer. The answer is much closer to a decentralized autonomous organization somehow empowering labor movements. Stop doing it, venture capitalists. You won't. I know. Disgusting stuff. And if DAOs are the next big thing, if NFTs are the next big thing, you shouldn't have to shill the crap out of them. You shouldn't have to. You didn't have to shill, most people won't have any idea what this is, but you didn't have to shill Earthlink back in the day. You didn't have to talk about how great your Earthlink subscription was when you were on the internet. We don't need to financialize every little thing, but if you're going to do that and you want that to be the future, don't tell me it's going to help me. It won't. And don't try to convince me to buy your token for your DAO.
And if you're participating in a DAO that wants to, for example, make a TV show, you should make sure that the thing you're purchasing involves some kind of, rights against the property. Otherwise, you'll be in an embarrassing story for years to come.
One more ultimate embarrassing DAO that I think has kind of already disappeared and everyone has forgotten about is that island DAO, where they were going to buy an island.
No, that's still going around. There was a bit of a controversy today because they admitted in their Discord that they'd been lying in their white paper because the island they hoped to buy, the person who was considering selling it hated crypto. So in their white paper, they had to basically say that they weren't going to use any of the funds fundraised to actually buy the island. The funds fundraised were just to get the governance token, right? And they were going to find some other way to buy the island. But then today in their Discord, they're like, oh yeah, that was all a lie.
Cool. Well, so that's one issue that they had. They also said that the age of
consent is mental maturity.
The age of consent is mental maturity. They said that on their Twitter page in public for everyone to read, which is just utterly astounding. But that wasn't it either. They also got in trouble because they were using images that they had stolen from creators to sell their DAO tokens. And so creators ultimately started trying to stop that from happening. And then they started DMCAing and going after people who were complaining about them. It's been a complete show.
Decentralization is when you send DMCA notices to Twitter.
Yeah. We're off the top of our heads able to name 10 bad DAOs that have done bad things and failed in every way. Meanwhile, the one that is at least operating in the way it's supposed to, I guess, would be MakerDAO. And what is that? The 10th biggest stablecoin?
Yeah.
No one uses it compared to every other stablecoin. Centralized stablecoin. And MakerDAO has a reserve holding of centralized stablecoins. So ultimately, it has issues of centralization as well. So I just think there's so many problems with this solution in search of a problem that it's going to be years before we see, if ever, any real world utility for this kind of innovation.
Bet it could be used to raise a bunch of money for a fancy country club, though.
Well, this is all these DAOs and such claim that Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and Patreon are centralized mechanisms that take cream from the top, and that it's bad for creators because they're not getting their full cut still. Meanwhile, if I want to get in on a DAO, what I have to do is take my US dollars, find an exchange somewhere that I can go on, let them take a cut of my US dollar purchase of some, let's say, Ethereum. They get whatever it is. So for Coinbase, I don't know what it is, 2% for Coinbase. There's obviously other options that are lower than that. It depends on which exchange I'm at. But now I've already taken a haircut. Then I have to send that Ethereum off exchange to purchase this DAO token wherever it's being offered, likely only on Uniswap or something. So now I send it off the exchange where I just made this USD purchase. I have to spend gas to now move this Ethereum somewhere else. And now I have to trade that Ethereum for this token, which again is going to get hit with a gas fee. So I don't know. It sounds quite similar to Kickstarter or Indiegogo or Patreon, which all take whatever it is, 10% or something, right? You end up losing 10% just by the process of wanting to be in the DAO.
Almost always people who claim that blockchains or decentralization are going to save you money are lying. There is value in decentralization, and I'm one of few critics who will say that. There's value in decentralization, but almost always that value comes with a very meaningful cost. And so avoiding the cost of decentralization will almost always result in cheaper solutions. So if you want to compete with a centralized solution, I would recommend finding something other than price to do it on.
Like you said, decentralization does alter certain conditions. It changes privacy, it changes speed, there's a lot of things it changes. And some of that stuff can be for a positive reason, but it comes at a price. And competing with Visa or something, if you want to be a payments processor, if you're going to be decentralized, that's going to get economically difficult.
Yeah, you're going to be more expensive, and so you better make sure you're good at the things Visa can't or won't do. And so if you're a DAO who plans on primarily existing in order to fundraise for something, you better have a compelling reason to do that that's different than Kickstarter or whatever. And I mean, I think in part they have that in the fact that there's a bunch of people who are newly crypto rich who are okay with spending relatively large in dollars amounts of crypto to participate in these things. And so the neo explosion of DAOs has almost entirely been focused around finding ways to fundraise off of newly rich crypto people.
And good luck to the crypto rich. They don't want to hear from us. They don't care what we have to say about this. So if you're newly minted king of crypto, good for you. And if you want to throw your coins into a bunch of different DAOs, have fun. I am not suggesting you shouldn't. Just stop trying to convince other people to do the exact same thing as you. It's a really weird look, especially if you genuinely believe that you're going to make a bunch of money. Why do you need other people to come swing in there unless
that's how you make the money? That's not how they make the money, is it? You're not, wait a second.
So that's going to do it. If you're new to our podcast, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And if you're a longtime listener, again, would really help us if you subscribe and rate us, hopefully not super low, on your favorite podcasting network. And we will talk soon.